presidential pin.
No
Still pretty
expense.
nice.
I have one from Nixon.
That's really cool.
I was at the White House when we reauthorized the GI Bill back in the early 70s.
You guys good back there? All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Morning. Want to welcome everybody to Manteno this morning. I'm Congressman LaHood. Love to see a great crowd here this morning in Kankakee County. If you have not seen the wonderful desserts over here on the far wall, we want to first of all give the women that made those desserts a round of applause. And that, and the women up here in the first row. So. A nice way to welcome us to Manteno today. And we look forward to a very good discussion and dialogue here this morning. As I mentioned, I'm Congressman LaHood. I represent the 16th Congressional District of Illinois. So my district, I have all of Grundy County and part of Livingston County and LaSalle County. I don't have any in Kankakee County, but border this particular area. And I'm really proud and honored to be here with all of you here today. I want to thank the chairman of our Select Committee on China, John Moolenaar, from being here from Michigan. To my left, he represents the 2nd Congressional District, and we gave him a visa to come into Illinois today to be with us. So please welcome John Moolenaar. And then also to my left here is Congressman Jim Baird from Indiana. So he's on the other side of us here in Indiana, represents the, Jim, you're the 4th Congressional District, but Jim served us in Vietnam. He's a farmer and comes from an agriculture world, does a great job on our Foreign Affairs Committee in the Congress and also on the Agriculture Committee. So give him a round of applause and welcome Jim Baird. And I'm going to get to our other witnesses here in a sec. But I have a few opening remarks that I want to make, and then I'm going to turn it over to Chairman Moolenaar and Jim Baird to make some opening comments. And then we'll show a short video here put together by the China Committee before introducing the rest of our participants, who will each have an opportunity to introduce themselves and provide some remarks. Following those remarks, and after everyone has spoken, we'll have some questions by Chairman Moolenaar and Representative Baird and myself. And I want to initially point out today that I have an empty chair that's sitting next to me to my right. We extended an invitation, both written and verbal, to Chuck Thielen, the Vice President of North American Manufacturing for Gotion, for him to join us here today and provide a perspective. As you can see, that went unanswered, and unfortunately, they're not here today. By the way, when we did a similar hearing in July up in Michigan in Congressman Moolenaar's district, same thing, extended an invitation, Gotion didn't show up for that hearing. And before I get into Gotion and the concerns that I have for this plan in Manteno, I want to take a step back briefly to talk about our Select Committee on China, of which I am a member under Representative Moolenaar's leadership. The Select Committee on China was created earlier in this Congress in a bipartisan way. At the time, Speaker McCarthy brought forth to create a Select Committee on China. When we created it, we had 146 Democrats that supported the creation of this. So this was a bipartisan effort to look at how do we win the strategic competition against China, and to do that in a bipartisan way. That committee was created for a couple different reasons. One, to expose the malign activities of the Chinese Communist Party and the work that they continue to do to undermine the U.S. and serve as an adversary. Secondly is, how do we win the strategic competition against China? So our committee has been working diligently on coming up with policy proposals to take on China. The TikTok bill, banning TikTok, bipartisan effort came out of our committee. Prohibiting Chinese from buying farmland across the United States that Jim Baird has led on came out of our committee. A number of other provisions, stopping outbound investment from U.S. companies for AI and quantum and high-capacity chip manufacturing that currently goes to China. So there's a lot of policy initiatives that our committee has been engaged in, in winning the strategic competition. And I got to tell you, the thing the CCP fears the most is bipartisan support against them. And this is not a Republican or Democrat issue, this is an American issue. And that's why this committee was created and why Chairman Moolenaar is leading the way on it. And while there may be different angles to the strategic competition, whether it's military, diplomatic, or technological, I am the belief that to win this fight, we have to do it on the economic front. And ultimately, that's why we're here today. I continue to remind folks in my district and all across, when I have an opportunity to talk, I don't say this to scare people, but China has a plan to replace the United States. And they're working at it every single day. They want to beat us militarily, economically, diplomatically, across the board. And the sooner we wake up to that, the better. And that's part of the reason why we're here today. And it's going to take years, decades even, for us to get a handle on this. And so what our committee is focused on is a 10, 20, 30-year plan on how we can win the strategic competition. We've had dozens of hearings and meetings for the Select Committee, and oftentimes, if you watch the hearings, it's difficult to determine who's a Republican and a Democrat. That is what is going to take to ensure that we win the strategic competition. Since being appointed to the Select Committee, one of the most important insights that I've learned is that the CCP has infiltrated many aspects of America and continues to do that. China continues to play by a different set of rules and standards than every other industrialized country in the world. Even though our economies are intertwined economically, they continue to steal our intellectual property. They continue to exercise what's called wolf warrior diplomacy across the globe, where what do they tell other countries? Democracy doesn't work anymore. You can't trust the United States. So they continue to undermine us. What they're doing in the South China Sea with the provocation there is problematic, and what they continue to do with our allies there. Which again brings us to our discussion here today. In September of 2023, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker first announced that Gotion would be coming to Manteno to open a new electric vehicle lithium battery manufacturing plant. In his announcement, Governor Pritzker shared that the state had offered Gotion a lucrative taxpayer-subsidized package of more than $500 million to make Illinois home. In addition to these state-based incentives, Gotion has said it is, quote, reviewing and assessing its ability to claim federal tax credits through the Biden-Harris administration, so-called the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, which passed out of the Congress with not a single Republican vote and was signed into law in 2022. The abuse of these taxpayer dollars should be enough to make you stop and think, but it doesn't end there. In our extensive work on the China Committee, we have found troubling links between Gotion, the Communist Chinese Party, and forced labor. In recent filings, Gotion has claimed it was, quote, wholly owned and controlled by, unquote, its parent company, Gotion High-Tech, which is headquartered in China. According to Gotion High-Tech's own bylaws, the company is required to, quote, carry out party activities in accordance with the Constitution of the Chinese Communist Party, unquote. In June of this year, our committee uncovered links to forced labor between Gotion and the CCP, including findings that, one, Gotion sources aluminum foil from a subsidiary of Xinjiang Nefarious, a CCP state-owned enterprise known for its prolific use of forced labor, including forced housing of Hong men and Uyghur women and their families in the Xinjiang region of China. Gotion sources material from Xinjiang Joint World, which is a company that participated in, quote, poverty alleviation through labor transfer, again, an ambiguous way of saying forced labor and education camps that they have implemented in the Xinjiang region. This kind of activity is unacceptable and raises serious concerns about the intentions of Gotion here in the United States. We know that the CCP and President Xi have an agenda to challenge the United States' economic leadership and are determined to maintain their market dominance. Has made it clear that it will utilize any means necessary to achieve these goals, particularly through state-owned and subsidized enterprises that engage in forced labor. While I believe we should consider every opportunity available to bring new businesses and more jobs to Illinois, It is simply deplorable that governors like J.B. Pritzker and Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan have decided to leave taxpayers on the hook for what could end up being billions of dollars in federal and state subsidies funneling to companies beholden to the malign actors like the CCP. It is also important to point out that companies like Gotion that are protected by the CCP would never allow U.S. citizens to work anywhere near their sensitive material or intellectual property. So while this new plant will create some new jobs in the area, it will also require Chinese nationals to move to Illinois to ensure their trade secrets are protected. We in Congress must do more to prevent this type of malign influence from infiltrating our country. That is why I'm pleased to join Chairman Moolenaar in introducing our bill, which we did earlier this year, H.R. 6175, the No Gotion Act, a bill that would prohibit companies affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party from being able to receive any federal energy tax credits that came out of the Biden-Harris administration's IRA. That bill, which we introduced, has bipartisan support in the Congress. And as we move forward, I remain committed to working with my colleagues on the Select Committee on China and throughout the Congress to hold the CCP and politicians like J.B. Pritzker accountable, who are willing to turn a blind eye to corruption, national security threats, and potential harm to their constituents. We cannot allow the CCP to gain foothold in our backyards, especially at Illinois taxpayers' expense. With that, I now recognize Chairman Moolenaar for his opening remarks. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Darren LaHood, and thank you for your leadership bringing us together and for your leadership on our committee. And he does so much in our Congress and is respected across the board. I also want to say what a privilege it is to be with Representative Jim Baird, who we serve together. He's a leader on agriculture, and you've got kind of a Midwest team.
Sorry.
All right.
Hold on, we've got a bad mic, but we have one we're not using.
We thought that was the Chinese, maybe. We weren't sure.
Being hacked.
Okay, could have been Pritzker.
Well, you know, I just want to tell you a little bit about my district. It happens to include the community of Big Rapids in Michigan, and that's an area where Gotion is trying to build a battery component facility. And the community, like yours, it's a fight between David and Goliath. And Green Charter Township is the home of 3,200 people, and they're holding their own against a giant multinational company that's receiving hundreds of millions of dollars in subsidies and bullying its way into town. Last November, David struck a blow against Goliath as the voters of Green Charter Township voted out the board that approved the Gotion deal that the people didn't want. But it wasn't a knockout, and Goliath continues to fight today. They are actually suing the small town and threatening to bury it under legal action. You know, it's interesting because the documents in the court case show even more shady dealings between the company's executive and the government officials. They gave one official $2 million for land that is only valued at $180,000. They promised a free, all expenses paid trip to China for another official. But worst of all, and this is what I want you to hear, because these are the kinds of tactics they're using. They tried to get personal information from court documents to disparage one of their own opponents. So let there be no doubt that the divide in the community, Big Rapids area, is caused by Gotion. It refuses to accept that the majority of the people do not want this CCP-affiliated company in their backyard. And I've said from the beginning that I want to see more jobs and investment in our country, but we must not let companies that are controlled by a country that sees us as the enemy, we can't allow them to build here. Would you agree with me on that? You know, for the past few decades, Republicans, Democrats, and independents all had hoped that engaging with the Chinese Communist Party would somehow create new markets for American goods and services, and that the Chinese people would eventually enjoy many of the same rights and liberties that we have in our country. This idea took hold even in the Midwest, where state leaders in both parties sought to attract Chinese businesses and offered taxpayer incentives to win these companies over and get them to build here. But we must acknowledge it has become increasingly clear that times have changed. We must reset the economic relationship between China and the U.S., and we must be vigilant against welcoming companies like Gotion to our communities. As Darren said, Gotion Inc. is a wholly owned subsidiary of Gotion High Tech, which is located in China. Many members of the company's leadership are also members of the Chinese Communist Party. Through a civil-military fusion, all Chinese companies are beholden to the CCP and the Chinese military. Xi Jinping, the leader of China, has explicitly said that the CCP wants to, quote, tighten international production chains dependence on China, end quote. Letting Gotion build in Illinois would help him do that. You know, in America, we need more time to develop our own battery technology to catch up. But can you imagine working for an American company, working tirelessly to develop innovative battery technology, and then you find out that your tax dollars are being used to subsidize a competitor from China? I think we all know that's wrong, and we would never want that to happen to us. As Darren mentioned, he and I have introduced the No Gotion Act, which would stop the green energy tax credits in President Biden's so-called Inflation Reduction Act from going to CCP-affiliated companies and their subsidiaries. We cannot give these companies our tax dollars. We must stop funding our own demise. Finally, you should know that the brave men and women of our military want nothing to do with Gotion, as the Department of Defense is prohibited from buying the company's batteries. So why would we allow this company to receive tax dollars, buy our land, and build a factory here? Why would we allow its batteries into our homes, into our cars? Our own military is telling us Gotion is a bad business partner, and yet state and local officials refuse to listen. We will continue to speak out against this project and fight for all of us who do not want the Goliath of the CCP in our own backyards. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Moolenaar. We'll now turn to Congressman Jim Baird for any opening remarks. Yeah, we can give him a round of applause.
All right.
That probably means I ought to quit right now because I'm ahead, right? Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here, and it's really a pleasure to serve with these two congressmen in Washington, D.C. They're very conservative, they're very forthright, and do a lot to represent the state of Illinois, state of Michigan. So I thank both of you for allowing me to be here. You know, I gotta say though at the beginning, I come from a farm community just across the state line, represent that district right along the Indiana-Illinois state line, and I can't help when I come driving here this morning, sun shining, corn and soybean harvest is going on, and it reminds me what it means to be free, and it reminds me. Reminds me how wonderful the things that we have in this country are, and to recognize those service members that have given so much to make sure we keep this freedom. And now I think it's up to us to make sure we preserve that. But I do have a few remarks that I might make. I really appreciate, when I look at this group, I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. And I mean that sincerely, because this is the kind of activity and the kind of thing that really lets people know that we're not interested in letting the Chinese Communist Party take over anything in this country. And we're certainly not interested in them taking the leadership around the world. The threat of the Chinese Communist Party has already been mentioned, but we cannot overstate that. The CCP's aspirations to unfettered wealth and power have allowed them to target critical areas of our modern economy with no regard for freedom or human rights. The CCP wants nothing more than to take over the U.S. as the #1 economy and military threat to spread and malign influence. And I fought in Vietnam, and so I can tell you that there are a lot of countries around the world and a lot of societies that really look to America as a place for hope and for providing that shining light on the hill. And we need to make sure we preserve that. And that's what this kind of a meeting does, in my opinion, is to make sure we're expressing our opinion about those things that we disagree with.
Thank you for your service, sir.
Thank you. But I'll turn that right back to you because, and that, I'm getting off track here. I'm getting off track. But I really appreciate the common sense attitude that we have of people in the rural areas and people like you. I understand what you're saying, and I really don't understand some of the people we're around in Washington. So it's good to be here. I wanted to mention too that we mentioned it is a matter of national security what these folks are trying to do, and since I'm involved in agriculture so much, I'm really concerned about their attitude towards that and our food security. So it is national security, it is our food security, and I want to make sure. Thank you. I want to make sure we're a part of making sure that doesn't happen. And it's interesting to me how some of the government agencies that we have, and even governors like Pritzker and Whitmer, that are really approving these kind of things. And to me, who's taking care of us, the people here in this? And so it's individuals like this that I really appreciate being with. So. I've got several other comments I could make, but I think I've really addressed the things that are important, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Congressman Baird. We're now going to play a short video. It's a little over 2 minutes long, and then we'll have Amanda speak first. So if we're ready with the video, we'll go ahead and play that. This was put together by our China committee.
Over the past several months, the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party undertook a thorough investigation of the supply chains of two leading Chinese electric vehicle battery producers, Gotion High-Tech and Cattle. Gotion and Cattle are deeply linked to the most troubling Chinese organizations involved in the enslavement of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. Gotion and Cattle source products or services directly from companies involved in the Chinese Communist Party's ongoing genocide against the Uyghurs. For example, they both work with the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps, or XPCC. XPCC is a Chinese Communist Party paramilitary organization that facilitates modern-day slavery in China. The XPCC provides forced laborers to nominally private Chinese companies, including, according to our investigation, alleged subsidiaries of CATL and Gotion. It is so bad, it is blacklisted by the United States government. According to experts, the CCP uses the XPCC to control, intimidate, disperse, and ultimately break down the Uyghur people until there is nothing left of their culture. But the troubling connections don't stop there. Gotion's supply chains are directly tied to a number of other CCP-owned bad actors that are forcing the Uyghur people into forced labor as we speak. We cannot allow these companies to continue to operate in our country, exposing American companies and consumers to their slave labor-tainted supply chains. That's why Chairman Moolenaar called on the Forced Labor Enforcement Task Force to immediately place Gotion and cattle on the Uyghur Forced Labor Entity List, which would prohibit Americans from importing products and services from either company. America cannot be complicit in the Chinese Communist Party's ongoing genocide.
Now we're going to hear from a number of our witnesses. Strange, I thought that was the video still playing. And we're going to hear from a number of our witnesses now. So our first witness we're going to hear from is somebody that I don't think needs any introduction here in Manteno. That's Amanda Piker. When you think of, yeah, we can give her a round of applause. When I say Amanda has been a warrior, she really has. There's nobody been more committed and dedicated at the grassroots level than Amanda here in Kankakee County. And I know she started off kind of on a lonely battle, but I know she has lots of support in this room here today. So, you know, when you think about how you have change, it's at the grassroots level. And Amanda's leading that effort. And so we were thrilled to have Amanda up in Michigan. She did an excellent job testifying up there, and thrilled to have her today. We would not be here today if it wasn't for Amanda Piker. So.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for being here. It wouldn't be possible it wouldn't be possible without everybody sitting in this room today. So, good morning, distinguished panel. My name is Amanda Piker, and I am a resident of Manteno. I am also a founding board member of the Concerned Citizens of Manteno. On behalf of the Concerned Citizens of Manteno, I thank you for the opportunity to participate in this roundtable discussion. Today, I will present a synopsis of how a handful of people in power, namely Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, Manteno Mayor Tim Nugent, and the Economic Alliance of Kankakee County worked behind the people's back to bring a toxic, dangerous lithium battery plant to Manteno. This company, called Gotion, also has known ties to the Chinese Communist Party and is a foreign adversary to not only the citizens of Manteno, but to the entire country. Most of us in this community started to hear chatter on social media around September 6, 2023, regarding plans for a lithium battery factory in our town. Then just a day later, it was confirmed Pritzker was coming to Manteno to announce the opening of this plant. The majority of the citizens had only about 2 days to process what was happening in our community. We organized a small, peaceful protest for this announcement and immediately organized our opposition. The citizens began to ask many questions. First and foremost, we all wanted to know how this happened without anyone's knowledge. Our mayor, Tim Nugent, happens to be the president of the Economic Alliance of Kankakee County. This is a public-private entity of self-appointed business leaders in our county. Acting as president of the Economic Alliance, our mayor signed a non-disclosure agreement and was prohibited from disclosing details of the deal. His inability to say the name of the company was verified through one of many FOIA requests. In August of 2023, prior to the Gotion announcement, our mayor, acting as president of the Economic Alliance, visited every taxing body in our county asking for the boards to approve a $2 million tax abatement for 30 years. He presented this deal as Project Unity, which is the title the state of Illinois gave the Gotion deal. Every taxing body in our county voted for the abatement without knowing the company name or its origins. In addition to $536 million in Illinois tax credits, Gotion was given a 30-year cap on its property taxes at $2 million. Based on the inflated sale of the building, which was on the market for $58 million before the deal, and sold to Gotion afterwards for about $137 million, this cap is another tax gift. We are very concerned about the proximity of the Gotion plant to our town. The plant is less than 1,200 feet from 14 residential homes that are located within a large subdivision, and less than a half mile from a large subdivision, a school and daycares. Gotion's lawyers are inferring the plant is outside of our town limits. That is not true. This location is in our town. As you can imagine, we are concerned for our safety, our children's safety, and our environment. For plant production, Gotion needed the land to be rezoned from light industrial to heavy industrial. This was done through an open public hearing in November in front of our Planning Commission. Hours of testimony and questions from the citizens were heard at this hearing with few comments of support. The Planning Commission voted unanimously to rezone the land to heavy industrial, even though Manteno Village ordinances prevents a heavy industrial plant from being located within the village. The zoning is in violation of our village ordinances. I would like to point out some facts we have found through research and FOIA requests. Gotion is Chinese-owned and committed to communist ideals according to their own articles of association. No long form from the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States has been completed for strict review. This is despite a new rule added to the National Defense Authorization Act that prevents batteries manufactured by Gotion and other Chinese-based CCP-tied companies. Under J.B. Pritzker's administration, Gotion was given $125 million in incentive checks, which went directly to Gotion's president, Chen Li, along with an incentive package of $536 million. Gotion objected to the high percentage of taxes going to our schools and requested a decrease in the percentage for the tax abatement. No environmental impact studies or health risk assessments have been performed. In 2019, debris from the adjacent rock quarry damaged the building that houses the Gotion plant, where volatile lithium batteries will be stored. The blast debris penetrated the roof, destroying the shelving below. The seismograph used to measure the strength of the quarry blast is located at the Superintendent of Public Works residence. Repeated complaints of strong blasts have been voiced by the citizens of Manteno for years. We have reason to be very concerned about the lithium batteries being next door to a quarry with such strong blasting. At least 231 acres of farmland have been purchased under LLCs for Gotion. The building for the proposed plant was also purchased under an LLC, as well as 3 homes in the neighborhood across the street. Each home is housing 7 to 9 migrant workers. The Army National Guard Readiness Center, an Army Aviation Support Facility in Kankakee, is among the largest projects undertaken by the Illinois National Guard. It is owned by the Department of Military Affairs and is located less than 20 miles south of Gotion's front door. It is the home to 2 aviation battalions, a medevac unit, and 10 UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters. Recent job postings on Glassdoor.com advertise jobs starting at $20 an hour, with a trip to China, which is happening now. Kankakee Community College, our local community college, and our county received a workforce development grant to train the local workforce for this plant. During the Planning Commission meeting, we were told they had identified 4 classes that would prepare the local workforce for a job at Gotion. Why are they sending people to China to train? I could go on and on giving reasons why we should all be concerned about Gotion being here in our country. The above are mere highlights. If it was not for Gotion, for our connection to our Michigan partners, and the quick organization of the citizens of Manteno, the Chinese-owned plant would have waltzed right into our small town unchecked and aided by our own local government. The concerned citizens of Manteno have filed a lawsuit against both Gotion and the village of Manteno, which has garnered nationwide support and attention. We hope our mission will help advance the No Gotion movement and further inform the Select Committee on the CCP. Key takeaways that I would like for you to remember. The Economic Alliance is a group of non-elected business people who are responsible for bringing Gotion to the area. The mayor of Manteno then used his elected position to thrust this deal upon the citizens of Manteno. As an elected official, in our opinion, this violates our mayor's oath and his fiduciary duty to his constituents. Finally, Gotion is hiding behind LLCs. We do not know exactly who is involved in the LLCs that have purchased land in our town, but we do know that China is here. How can the citizens be sure that these people are vetted and we are safe? This may be happening in our small town, but this is not a small issue. As your committee knows, this is a national issue. We are doing all that we can as individual citizens. We pay attention to what happens in our community, but we were completely blindsided by this deal. We have raised thousands of dollars to fight the rezoning and nuisance in court. But the truth is, Gotion would not even be operating if it weren't for massive federal and tax subsidies. We are essentially paying for something we don't want and we don't trust. I thank you for your time, and I'm available for further questions.
Well, Amanda, thank you so much for that powerful statement. I'm now going to turn it next to Emily de la Brea, who's really an expert when it comes to China. We're thrilled that she made the trip to Manteno. She's the co-founder of Horizon Advisory in Washington, D.C., and Emily will provide some broader perspective on the Chinese strategy and how it is leading to many of the issues that we're currently tackling here in the U.S. Emily, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for being here and for the work you're doing. It's a real privilege to be speaking here today. I want to talk about what's animating China's investments in batteries in China and internationally, the risks that poses, and possibilities for a path forward. The first question is, what is it China is trying to accomplish? And this has already been spoken to, but what Beijing wants is control. China wants to secure the dependence of the rest of the world, to make sure that we rely on China for everything from energy and batteries to semiconductors. Therefore, that countries can't make things without China, and that companies can't make money without China. If Beijing can do this, that grants it leverage that it can use to access markets and technology, to influence political and economic systems, and ultimately to coerce. Beijing has shown that it is very willing to use its industrial capacity and its supply chain leverage to achieve its geopolitical ambitions. In this effort, China starts at the upstream, the beginning of value chains, and then works downstream to the more advanced, higher value add things at the end of the value chains. For example, take the battery and the EV supply chain. China starts with the critical minerals and metals that batteries are made out of, establishes monopolies over core inputs into batteries so that battery makers come to depend on China. Once battery makers depend on China, Beijing suddenly has access to their technology. China can use that to incubate companies that get state subsidies and that have preferred access to the critical inputs China controls, so that they can, I don't want to say outcompete because it's not really competition, but so that they can destroy their international competitors. That's the first step. That's how China controls the battery segment of the value chain. Then cars come to depend on China. China plays the same approach, dominates cars. Suddenly markets and mobility depend on China. This upstream first approach means that China controls the foundation that it's playing this industrial war out on. It also means that all too often we overlook the extent of China's control over value chains because we're looking at the cars. And so we don't notice that the minerals and the batteries and the metals going into them are all under China's hand until the tipping point where suddenly China eviscerates the global market and we're all driving Chinese cars. Throughout, Beijing consistently prioritizes new and emerging sectors because these are fields where there either aren't incumbents or there are playing fields that are being rewritten. So China has a chance to, as Chinese sources put it, leapfrog. Batteries, new energy, renewable energies, these are a really clear priority on China's part for that reason. Also because their markets are growing. So the advantage China's poised to get is only going to increase. Finally, and here we get to a real part of the risk, China's entire approach, this entire industrial policy, runs contrary to our normative and economic values. Beijing's industrial policy is funded by the Chinese government and fueled by forced labor and other humanitarian atrocities. Every Chinese champion is out there playing a non-market game. That's why you can't say they're competing. They're just using government money to hollow out the international economy and our international economic values. And China's industrial policy is inextricably tied to forced labor and Beijing's genocide in its country more broadly. We already saw a video speaking to the ties between Gotion and other EV battery companies and forced labor. That's not an accident. Xinjiang is the major hub of China's genocide against the Uyghur minorities. Xinjiang is also a major site of mineral and metal extraction, processing, and other downstream production that goes into batteries. For example, it's the second largest producer of electrolytic aluminum in China. Electrolytic aluminum is a critical input into battery packaging. It also hosts, this is where I pull out my data points. The region is also home to China's largest lithium mine and China's third largest lithium reserves overall. Its reserves of cesium, tantalum, niobium, other critical inputs into batteries are also significant. And it has China's second largest electrolyted nickel company. Beijing has also very deliberately ensured that its battery supply chains are integrated with the Xinjiang production to make sure that its producers are using Xinjiang-made products, and therefore that as the world comes to depend on Chinese battery production, we also depend on slave labor, and therefore that we can't do anything about that slave labor. None of this is new. The risks in China's playbook have already been clear in precedent. For example, in the solar energy industry, China did exactly what it's doing today in batteries. Today, China controls 95% of the solar energy value chain. You can't make solar energy without China. Now there's a raft of new industries that are facing that same risk. These include batteries. They include core elements of the semiconductor value chain. They're military relevant, and they're the cornerstone of the international economy. That makes the present moment really important. We're at a tipping point in terms of China's control about how we make, how we move, how we run business. The present moment is also particularly important because of the regulatory environment. The US at the national and the local level is investing in domestic production. But right now, that domestic production does not protect against China. And I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, you know this better than anybody else. China sees our investments that are intended to bolster our economy as an opportunity to come in, to quote unquote localize in the US, to build facilities here that grant improved access to our market, our technology, increased influence over our governance and our economic system, and to do all of that funded by us as taxpayers. We're paying for China's industrial policy. Moreover, China doing this neuters our efforts to strengthen our own economy and to rebuild production here. Every factory that's built by or with a Chinese company is not in the US, is not built by or with a US company. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The policies that have been passed in Washington and across this country aren't going to be passed again. We're not going to have this investment in domestic production. If it's China that's getting these benefits, we're going to lock in a world where our industrial base depends on China. All this is risk, but there's also opportunity here. Just as new and emerging industries provide an opportunity for China to leapfrog, they also provide an opportunity for us as a country to rebuild the industrial base that's been eroded by Beijing. And there's a relatively straightforward way to do this. We don't have to have a government that goes in and picks winners and losers. We don't have to do complicated economic analysis. What we do have to do is keep China out. We have to keep Chinese companies from being the ones that we're funding with taxpayer dollars and tax credits and other subsidies. And we have to make it harder for Chinese companies to invest in the US. If we do that, every factory that a Chinese company does not build, that's a factory that a US company can build. And that's how we can beat China.
Well, Emily, thank you for that very substantive presentation. And I know we may have some questions for you later on some of the things you talked about, but really appreciate you being here. We're next going to turn to another elected official. That's State Representative Dan Calkins. Dan represents the Decatur area. He's been a great leader in Springfield, but has raised the level of awareness between the Pritzker administration and what they've engaged in and this Gotion plan. He is a champion of taxpayers, and we're thrilled to have Dan Calkins here today. Dan, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to give comments about the Gotion plant here in Manteno. We'll talk about how the deal came about and some other important notes related to that agreement. But before I get started, I am Dan Calkins. I live in Decatur. I represent the 88th House District, and I'm a founding member of the Illinois Freedom Caucus. And it's great to see all of you here because we were here a year ago to sound the alarm and to help you all bring this issue to the forefront. Now, we've been the loudest voice in Springfield against this Gotion plant here, and we're proud to continue the fight, to stand shoulder to shoulder with all of you as we try to get this deal undone. The Gotion deal has far-reaching impacts throughout the state of Illinois, and even as you've already heard today, the United States of America. First, a little bit of background. Illinois is an energy-rich state. We produce the most nuclear power in the country. We have the second largest deposits of coal. And while we don't produce natural gas, we have vast caverns that store the fourth largest amount of natural gas in the country. We also have oil wells, and due to our central location, have thousands of miles of pipelines that transmit natural gas and oil to points north, south, east, and west of Illinois. Our electric grid pulls power from the MISO and the PJM markets. Now, despite our advantages in fossil fuels and nuclear power, the Illinois General Assembly in 2008 decided to adopt renewable portfolio standards, jumping on the bandwagon of those who believe we have a climate crisis and that shutting down fossil fuel generation and replacing it with wind and solar is somehow the answer. It is not. But that's a discussion for another day. 4 years ago, our renewable goal was 20%. We wanted to be 20% renewable by 2020. When it was obvious that that goal wasn't going to be met, the goalposts were moved to achieve 25% renewables by 2025. Then, most recently, the state goal was moved again to 40% renewable energy by 2030, with Illinois' goal of eventually becoming carbon-free by 2050. Not only have we missed every one of those targets, those goals will never be met. At best, Illinois wind and solar energy production is 13% of our needs, far short of the 2025 goal. On the consumption side, it is even lower, as we all know that Illinois pulls power from the grid that span many states. So why is this important? It's important because the belief in a climate crisis and the destruction of fossil fuel generation as a means of solving that crisis is what's brought us to this point. As a result, politicians are investing heavily in electric vehicle production and electric vehicle batteries. Now, I reject the entire premise that politicians should use taxpayer money to influence the market. It's even worse when the marketplace is already sending signals that people don't want to purchase EVs at the rate the government is trying to push them. Early EV adoption is over, and the masses have rejected EVs. With the Gotion deal, it's obvious that Governor Pritzker and his progressive Democrat colleagues are all in to spend our tax money on the new Green Deal. To help attract businesses, in 2021, Governor Pritzker signed into law new tax credits for EV businesses, which the Crane Chicago Business Magazine said were massive incentives that may be, and I quote, the largest ever in the state's history. But 10 months later, Illinois was still 0 for 18 in attracting an EV battery plant. Even Rivian, which assembles electric-powered trucks down in Normal, chose Georgia for its first battery plant. So in 2022, Governor Pritzker asked the legislators to approve even more incentives to attract EV businesses. And I'm proud to say I did not vote for that. Included in that deal was what we've heard today about the deal closing fund that he could use to essentially bribe businesses to come to Illinois. And that's how he landed Gotion. In another Crane Chicago Business article, at the time the deal was announced, they wrote, quote, Pritzker said the state had many things to offer Gotion, but the deal closing fund approved last year by the General Assembly was critical. It sent a signal to the nation and the world that Illinois is open for business. And if that's how you want to do business, draw me out. The deal closing fund is shrouded in secrecy. The governor completely controls who gets the money and how much they get. He only must notice the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate before he finalizes the deal. In the case of Gotion, they received $125 million of our tax money within 4 months of announcing the project and before they had final permitting. Now, that's not all that Gotion gets. The entire incentive package with the tax credits is worth $536 million. That's our taxpayer money. But on top of that, they're getting job training, they're getting a new substation and transmission lines, they're getting a new natural gas infrastructure, they're getting road upgrades, and also a property tax cap for 30 years, which will save them tens of millions of dollars, according to your mayor. At both the state and local level, this deal was made behind closed doors and with no public input. I and many of my colleagues and you and the fellow Illinoisans strongly oppose Governor Pritzker putting his heavy hand on the scale of the marketplace and deciding which companies receive massive tax incentives. We also strongly oppose subsidizing our foreign competition and indeed our #1 economic and military adversary. Being open to foreign investment doesn't mean we give massive tax breaks to our adversaries that steal our technology, manufacture fentanyl precursors, and release COVID-19. As someone who served our country in uniform, I frankly cannot imagine that our governor would be funneling my tax money to any company controlled by the CCP. Now, China already has a competitive advantage in EV batteries. They are only locating in the U.S., and particularly here in Illinois, due to these tax incentives. Even more confounding, why would we be offering tax incentives when Manteno's location makes sense for any manufacturing company, as it's only 30 miles from the largest inland port in the United States? I also have concerns about state oversight. Illinois has performed poorly in its oversight functions. From environmental oversight to properly documenting the employment metrics, I have little confidence in our ability to monitor this project. On a final note, there are a number of hidden costs to both the state and local government that will continue to fall on the backs of taxpayers. In this deal, Manteno's population could literally grow by 25% in a very short period. What does that mean for schools, infrastructure, housing costs? Who will bear that burden? We know it won't be Gotion. They also been given this property tax freeze for 30 years. If they are freezing Gotion's property tax assessment, then they are completely skewing the property wealth of this local area and the underlying value that is used to calculate state support for the school districts. Underreporting your property wealth means other school districts don't get their fair share of state education dollars, and that is unfair. The bottom line, this is a bad deal for Illinois taxpayers. Anything Congress can do to help us get this deal rescinded would be greatly appreciated. We shouldn't be playing venture capitalists with taxpayer money, and we shouldn't be funding a company backed by the CCP. And thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Well, thank you, Representative Calkins, for your leadership on this. We'll next turn to Robbie Doobie, who's an attorney with Eklund and Blando in Minneapolis, but he's the lead attorney for much of the litigation that has gone on lawsuits that have been filed both in Michigan and here in Manteno. So, Robbie, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, and before I begin, I just wanted to thank Rep. Calkins for his service as well for our country. Good morning. My name is Robbie Doobie, and as Rep. LaHood said, I'm an attorney with the national law firm of Eklund and Blando, where our symbol is actually a slingshot, because we take the David and Goliath fights, we sue the government. That's what my practice focuses on. And in recent years, this has taken a very alarming turn, as federal, state, and local governments have worked together to facilitate the construction of massive industrial projects by subsidiaries of Chinese Communist Party companies. Even more concerning, all of these projects, every single one, is being built next to a military base. Now, I first became aware of this disturbing trend from the Fufeng corn wet milling plant in Grand Forks, North Dakota, being built by a CCP subsidiary called Fufeng, with the full backing of the city council and with funding from the state of North Dakota. There, a brave group of citizens were fighting for their referendum rights, trying to stop the plant from being built in their community. In a story that would sadly be repeated nationwide, the local government fought furiously to not only deny their citizens referendum rights, but to hide information about the project from their citizens in the name of economic development. Ultimately, we were forced to go all the way to the North Dakota Supreme Court before the Air Force finally took action to shut Fufeng down based on the clear national security risks they presented. That victory was short-lived, however, as I began to receive calls from a series of other citizens and organizations across the country who were facing the very same plight. Next was a group in Marshall, Michigan, fighting the cattle plant being built with Ford, followed by another group in Green Charter Township, Michigan, fighting Gotion. Both companies were receiving millions in state subsidies to build their plants, and the story was the same. A denial of referendum rights that we've now had to take to the Michigan Supreme Court after the courts changed 100 years of precedent for the Marshall case, or a complete denial of information to the local citizens in Green Charter. And in fact, in Green Charter, the story was even more egregious. Gotion Inc., a CCP subsidiary that originally tried to build a project in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, before the community there kicked them out for being a national security concern, is seeking to build a dangerous lithium battery plant. It, too, is receiving millions in state subsidies and federal tax breaks. Depositions have revealed that board members were promised jobs by Gotion, offered trips to China, and, as Rep. Moolenaar mentioned, one even had a $2 million offer on his $180,000 property by Gotion, all undisclosed to the public and undisclosed to the board, that voted then to facilitate the plant. In this case, I represented a citizen group that tried multiple avenues to get the federal and state government to investigate the plant, all of which were rebuffed. In one almost comical example, the Fish and Wildlife Services would not even step in to stop Gotion from tearing down trees that hosted America's national symbol, bald eagles. Unfortunately, Gotion did not limit itself to Michigan, and that's why we're here. With millions more from the Illinois government, Gotion is trying to build another lithium battery plant here in Illinois, literally adjacent to an explosive quarry whose rocks have pierced the roof of its building and less than half a mile from an elementary school and a preschool. Just like in Green Charter. Gotion had the village board sign NDAs as members of the Separate Development Alliance, stopping these elected officials from speaking to the public. When I asked the board to conduct and request a full Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS, review, they refused, apparently having no interest in finding out whether Gotion was a national security threat. Throughout all this, the pattern has been the same. These CCP subsidiary companies obtain tens of millions of dollars in government subsidies, your money, before they've even broken ground on their planned projects. They promise to bring jobs while repeatedly downward revising those numbers and salaries and bringing in non-U.S. citizens to take those jobs. All the while, the local government refuses to listen to its citizens, calling them racist, ignorant, or opposed to progress, instead of recognizing them for the heroes that they are. I am here today to tell you that I firmly believe that failures in the law have facilitated the infiltration of these CCP-owned plants into our backyards. First and most egregious is CFIUS, whose sole purpose is to stop companies like Gotion from building critical energy infrastructure. After a perfunctory short-form review in 2018, CFIUS has never reinvestigated Gotion. This is due to at least two failures. One, there's no mechanism for citizens to request a CFIUS review. Instead, they have to go through their local governments, which frequently, just like here, have a vested interest in ensuring no such review occurs. And second, there's no automatic reevaluation trigger. Gotion is now registered as a foreign agent under the Foreign Agent Registration Act, but amazingly, that didn't trigger a new mandatory CFIUS reevaluation. That must change. Second, public disclosure and sunshine laws, designed to ensure our government is accountable to us, can apparently be defeated by creating a separate entity, having the public officials join that, and then sign NDAs in that capacity, turn around and tell their citizens, can't say a word to you. Elected officials are our servants. They have no right to keep secret from the public information about massive industrial projects, or frankly, any project. Again, a simple change in the law that would forbid public officials from signing such NDAs could have prevented this. Third, the Environmental Protection Agency, which will go out of its way to investigate small landowners building ditches, claims it has no role in monitoring or investigating these massive industrial plants. Why? Because the Inflation Reduction Act and Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, while providing millions in tax breaks, provide no direct funding. So the EPA says, we don't have a role here. The state EPAs need to review this. The exact same EPAs whose governors just paid billions or millions of dollars to bring those projects in. Again, a simple change to the law. The best action would be passing this committee's No Gotion Act, but failing that, changing the law so that companies that claim tax credits or tax breaks trigger necessary EPA involvement would significantly ensure that the federal government goes out of its way to investigate these. Thankfully, there is increasing nationwide awareness, as evidenced by the Select Committee on China and this roundtable of what is happening in our country. Citizens across the country are standing up and unfortunately having to take the law into their own hands. Here, we're lucky that we have local attorney Dave Bergdahl here, who's partnering with me to help fight the plant. But the reality remains that none of that should have been on your shoulders. However, I remain confident that justice will prevail, and I'm ready and excited to speak further today regarding what can be done to ensure our nation's critical military and energy infrastructures remain protected, and that citizens can keep their state and local government accountable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robbie. Our last witness today to testify will be Brian Kovaka, who lives just 1,000 feet from the proposed Gotion plant and will be affected more than anybody here today. So, Brian, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. I want to start by thanking you all for being here, especially our elected officials. I'm not naive. I know we have a presidential election in a month, so I'm sure your schedules are quite full. So the simple fact that you're here shows how important it is to all of you, so I thank you for that. My name is Brian Kovaka. I'm the named party in the Gotion lawsuit. Before I get into my reasons why I think a lithium battery plant being built right out my bedroom window is a dangerous idea, I'd figure I'd give you a quick rundown on myself. I am not originally from Manteno. I moved here in 2022 after a lifetime on the south side of Chicago. I graduated from Marist High School and studied mathematics at St. Joseph's prior to moving into the field that I am in now. As to why I moved to Manteno, there are a lot of different reasons. It was a nice, quiet town. I was looking to get away from the city. I had to look for a place that had a good school for my children, but probably the biggest reason was I had some medical issues back in 2021. I wound up having another spinal fusion. I had 5 levels of my spine fused together, and at that same time, my girlfriend, who is now my wife, was diagnosed with cancer. Manteno was a good fit for us because she was going through all her radiation and chemo down at Riverside. So that's what kind of led me here to Manteno, was to make it convenient for my family. Now that I've kind of explained how I got here, on to the important stuff of what I do for a living. I've spent the last 29 years in the transportation and warehouse industry since 1995. I spent a good solid 10 years specializing in hazardous materials, not only the transportation of hazardous materials, but hazardous waste as well, going into many places just like this for decades. For the past 5 years, I've been a safety director at a Fortune 500 company, which employs around 48,000 employees. We have around 230,000 vehicles on the road. We have 425 warehouses across the nation with around 95 million square feet of storage. My little slice of that pie is the Chicagoland market. We have around 20 locations that operate either local trucks or spotters. Several of them around 200 doors, with my biggest one being over 500 doors. For reference, Gotion's going to be around 80. I run the safety side of that. I have my own dedicated DOT number, which happens to be one of the safest in the state of Illinois. So I think all of that experience kind of qualifies me to talk about the next subject, which is our friends over at Gotion. On to Gotion. From the moment they announced it, I was 100% against it, and I wanted it stopped. I've been going in and out of places like this my whole life, so I know exactly what it's going to be. Besides what's going on in the inside, I'm more concerned about the 500-plus trailers that are going to be parked on the outside filled with hazardous materials. This is very close to families. It's very close to houses. It's very close to schools. And look, folks, there's no way around the fact that it's an industry standard that a plant like that, every single square inch of that facility is going to be dedicated to production. They will not keep any materials inside of that building. Everything's going to be kept outside. Raw materials, finished goods, hazardous waste, far away from any of the fire protections that they're talking about having. Manteno said that they will be ready for this. They said that their fire department is going to take all the proper steps to be ready. But my question is Wilmington ready? Is Elwood? Is Peatone? Bourbonnais, Bradley, Kankakee County, Will County? Because when something does go wrong, they're all going to have to respond, whether it goes wrong at that plant or we have an accident on the way to that plant. As somebody mentioned before, it's not a coincidence that this place is 30 miles away from one of the largest rail ports in the country. That's a big reason why they've built that. Based on everything I've read or seen on Gotion, I could speak for hours about everything they have either tried to minimize or to be perfectly honest, just flat out lie about. Just look at the fact of all the improvements we're doing on the roads. If this was truly going to produce less truck traffic than the Kmart distribution center, why are they spending millions of dollars on widening roads? It's because they lied about it. I have limited time up here, and to be honest, I would much rather listen to what our elected officials have to say, because I'm going to be perfectly honest. No matter how much I'm against this or you guys are against this, without them, there's absolutely nothing that we're going to be able to do to get this stopped. I thank you very much for your time today and look forward to answering your questions.
Brian, thank you for that. That concludes our witness statements here. We're going to turn to questions from the audience. We have some wireless mics here. If you want to ask a question of any of the panelists here. Before we do that, though, I want to make one point. You know, there's a lot of people that have really, both in Michigan and here, that have said, oh, what these people are saying is crazy stuff, it's conspiracy theories. They've diminished what the grassroots people have said. In my view, a lot of that changed yesterday. You may have seen this. This is from the Detroit News yesterday, posted at 6:18. Yesterday, the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office charged 5 University of Michigan students from China with espionage. And I'm going to give you a copy of the article because these 5 UM students that were in Ann Arbor from China, the allegation is that last year they were at Camp Grayling, which is a 147,000-acre training facility for the military and the Michigan National Guard in northwest Michigan. Beyond that, Grayling is the hub of the National All-Domain Warfighting Center, which trains U.S. troops and those allies like Taiwan in strategic and tactical battle operations. But here's what the indictment and what the FBI, and by the way, this is the Biden administration that indicted them and the FBI. This is what the criminal complaint says. It describes 5 Chinese nationalists who were found at a boat launch on Bear Camp near Camp Grayling at 12:30 a.m. on August 13, 2023, during live firing exercises. At the time, about 7,000 military officials, including participants from Taiwan, were undergoing training exercises. A sergeant major with the Utah National Guard who was there found them taking photos within 15 feet of military vehicles, tents, and communications equipment. The area was surrounded by caution tape featuring no trespassing signs, and was filled with tents, antenna, satellite dishes, vehicles, and generators. The sergeant major asked what they were photographing. They said they were with the media. After being confronted, the 5 Chinese nationals quickly left the area. Later, the investigation found out they had booked a hotel a week in advance at the Super 8 there, and they have security camera footage on this. This year-long investigation ended with the indictment of those. They've all left the country. So, by the way, this Camp Grayling is roughly 80 miles from the Gotion plant. So when you hear people talk disparaging folks in this room and people up in Michigan that somehow this is a conspiracy theory, it is not. So I want to make that available for anybody here today. It's out in the public, so that should say it all. With that, I think we have some wireless mics. Greg has one in the back there. If anybody has yep, and one over here. So if you want to raise your hand, Greg will find you, and you can ask a question of anybody up here. Please state your name and where you're from.
Hi. Hello, I'm Jillian, and I am from Vietnam. I am a board member with the CCOM, and I'm proud to have all of you guys here today. I don't really have a question. I have more of a comment because I don't think it gets discussed very often, and the EPA seems to want to put their head in the sand, but the Gotion facility here in Manteno sits right along Rock Creek. Rock Creek feeds into the Kankakee River that feeds into many multiple rivers and ultimately ends up at the Mississippi. And I don't think people in this area or surrounding areas like Bourbonnais, Bradley, and Kankakee really realize the impact that it will have when things go bad at this facility on our water supply. Not only that, Peatone, where I am from, just recently tapped into the Kankakee water supply. So my goal here today is just to make a statement for people to start looking at how this Gotion plant will affect our water supply when things go bad, because it does sit on Rock Creek that feeds into the Kankakee River, that feeds into many other rivers that supply us with much wildlife and water supply to this area. Thank you all. Thank you for your services, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you for your comments. Go ahead, Greg, over here.
Hi, my name is Bill Most. I've been a Manteno resident for over 35 years, and I love this town. It's awesome here. And I'm just wondering, our own local news source, the Daily Journal, and all news sources, they could be our best source of reaching out to young people that really need to know more about communism and what they do. Can't we touch them in any ways? All we ever get is negative news from them. Just last week we went to court and they had bad news about you know, like the case was dismissed and we know it wasn't. And one more thing I'd like to mention is, was Nugent and Pritzker invited to this, or could they have been, so we could ask them questions? I would have loved to ask them why they want to stab Americans in the back.
Well, I would just say on the last point, obviously Gotion has been invited. We've reached out to them numbers. I think their non-appearance speaks volumes. Their silence speaks volumes. They've had an opportunity to defend themselves, to counteract much of the information here today. They refuse to do that.
Yeah.
They can.
And let me just say on the China issue that you raised on educating people. I mean, part of what Chairman Moolenaar and our committee is doing is raising awareness on China. You know, exposing the malign activities that we talked about with China. But we got to do a lot more, particularly getting to young people on this. You know, in some ways, if you think about it, we won the Cold War against Russia because we could explain to what Russia was doing and how we were able to. It's harder with China, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so talking about, you know, what they're doing, stealing our intellectual property, what they did with COVID, what they've, you know, done in Hong Kong. You know, in many ways, I always say this, no one talks about Tibet anymore because they won in Tibet, right? No one talks about Xinjiang because they don't want anyone to talk about it. They won in Hong Kong too. Taiwan is next. But we have to wake up young people and the American people about the threat that China poses to it, and that's what we're trying to do.
I really think that's one of our biggest issues because they just don't understand anything about what China does.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
So I would just like to add, I think what Darren said was really important. And when you think of your local media, let's make sure you get the story out on how the community feels about this. And there's a couple of things that we've encountered in the Big Rapids, Green Township area. One is that people will say you're anti-Asian. That's what Gotion's VP has been saying. We're anti-Asian, that it's racist. And, you know, my response is always the biggest oppressor of Asians, the biggest oppressor of the Chinese people is the Chinese Communist Party. And really help people understand, we love the Chinese people. It's the government that is doing all of the nefarious things, both in China as well as threatening Japan, the Philippines. You know, you look at the entire region and how aggressive and threatening they are, how they're partnering a no-limits partnership with Russia, and how they're fueling the war in Ukraine. So I think it's really important that everybody here helps make those points, because Gotion will say you're anti-Asian, you're somehow racist if you don't support this. The other thing is, I think it's really important what Darren just shared. This was breaking news about the FBI investigation and these charges against these students, because for the longest time, you know, people have said, well, you're overreacting. You're making this, you know, about it's a conspiracy that somehow, you know, the Chinese are going to, have espionage. But the reality is, think about the spy balloon. Think about the Chinese police stations, the CCP police stations in New York City, that's whole goal was espionage and to intimidate the Chinese diaspora living in the area from speaking out against Xi Jinping or the Chinese Communist Party. You think about all these things, and now we have very clear evidence. And I want to just, what Emily said about the leverage, I think that's probably the best term that really describes what the CCP does. They will use every bit of leverage they can, whether it's students who are studying here, they will leverage the families of those students and threaten them. They will do anything, they will threaten, people in our military. They bribe, they will use every bit of leverage they possibly can, and that's what we're trying to prevent. We don't want more leverage here in the United States by the Chinese Communist Party.
Well said, John. Yeah, go ahead, Dan. You want to make a quick comment?
Just real quickly, Governor Pritzker's busy today announcing the EV infrastructure in Cahokia Heights and State Park. So I don't know where we're going to get the electricity, but if you're at the State Park in Cahokia Heights, you can someday be able to plug in your car rather than for him to be here with you all.
How about in the back there, the gentleman in the pink shirt? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Alan Pickrell. We just relocated here also 2 years ago to be by the children, retired from down southwestern Illinois, where I got to know Mr. LaHood and his father both. My question is, I keep hearing around, it's terrible, it's a great village, we love it here, and this is just tearing this town apart, and it's sickening, it really is. What is the timeline or chances of getting this stopped? Because I keep hearing it's done, it's done, it's done. And I really want to run for village trustee, even though I don't know anyone up here. But as Mr. LaHood knows, I was a county board chairman back home, and that's my question. What are the chances? I keep just hearing it's done.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to Robbie, because he'll have a comment on it. Listen, what we need to do is pass our No Gotion Act, because if they don't have their federal taxpayer money, they're going nowhere. So John and I and Jim are working as hard as we can to get that passed into law. So that's number one. Go ahead, Robbie.
Yes, the No Gotion Act is the most effective and quick way we can put a stop to this nationwide. You know, I will tell you, Alan, correct? what you're saying is a story that is repeated nationwide. Everywhere I have representatives, the story from the very beginning, from the village officials, town officials, is there's nothing you can do about it, it's a done deal. Sit down, shut up, say please and thank you, and you're welcome for bringing this in. That is what they want you to believe. The second a lawsuit is filed, they tell you it's never going to go anywhere. The second any development happens, they rush to the media and say, here's the calamities of what happened. The reality of what's going on with the lawsuit is they tried to dismiss our complaint on the substantive merits. They said, you can't sue us at all. You can't sue us on any grounds that you're trying to sue. And the judge said, on every single ground you're trying to sue on, you can sue them. Yep. All she said was, you need to bring me a shorter and more concise complaint. That's what we're going to do. So the lawsuit is proceeding. Unfortunately, the gears of the courts move very, very slowly. I think we've seen that with a lot of the nationwide cases that get attention. But we will be bringing a new complaint. We have the ability to bring a preliminary injunction request in our motions, and we will decide whether to do that or not soon. But once we get through this stage of the new complaint, it'll move to discovery very quickly, and we will move for a very, very aggressive timetable. I can tell you in the suit in Michigan, the timetable there, discovery was about 3.5, 4 months. Your typical civil case is a year and a half, right? And so these judges are recognizing how important these cases are, how dangerous these plants can be, and they are moving quickly once we get to that stage. So the case is still live. The media has reported that extremely inaccurately, and I hope that if anyone asks you, you will be able to be crystal clear about that. And we are moving at a good pace in the civil litigation for the civil litigation speeds, which unfortunately are not as fast as they should be.
Thanks. Go ahead, Mark.
Hey guys, first of all, thank you everybody for everything you're doing, Jim and John and Amanda for including me here. A lot of you Manteno folks know me. I'm Mark Rice. I'm running for Congress against the head of the CCP committee, or the co-head with Darren, Raja Krishnamurthy. I'm a very proud conservative Republican running for office. I hope to be in there with Darren, and we got to get this no Gotion thing through. This is just common sense, right? China is our enemy. I mean, that's what we're all talking about. I think we all recognize that. We all know that, so it's common sense against the nonsense of funding our enemies to come in here and destroy our country and take advantage of us. So my question is, after all of that, is it's really to you, Darren, because I feel that, Illinois is unfortunately a super, we're in the super minority, the Republicans here in Illinois, and the Democrats are supporting this thing. You said before the fact that people aren't here or their silence states volumes. My opponent, Raja, should be sitting next to you, and he is not. And I'm going to change that just by taking him out and getting somebody in there who's against this nonsense and for common sense. And my question to you is, only because I don't see that changing in the state very quickly, but we have the Republican majority, at least in the House for now, and hopefully the House, Senate, and in the White House come November, right, guys? And so my question to you is, Darren, what have we got to do to wake some of these Democrats up to come our way and to vote against this nonsense and to get it, what's going on federally, because locally it doesn't, and hopefully legally we can do something, but I believe this is a place where Congress has got to step up and get rid of these guys. Thank you.
Well, Mark, thank you. Let me just mention a couple things. I mentioned earlier, our No Gotion Act is bipartisan. So, and just ironically, there's a very competitive Senate race going on in the state of Michigan at the national level. It's an open seat. The Democrat running there, Alyssa Slotkin, supports our bill now, the No Gotion Act. The Democrat supports our position on the No Gotion Act, right? So, people see, I think, the light on this particular piece of legislation. But I would just say, Governor, I think it's ironic that Gotion has come to two Democrat states, Michigan and Illinois, right? Blue states, Governor Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan and J.B. Pritzker here, that they found a haven in blue states and not red states. I can't imagine Gotion going to Florida with Governor DeSantis or to Virginia with Governor Glenn Youngkin or to Texas. It wouldn't happen. So just take that for what it is. And what's frustrating, listen, I'm a fourth generation Illinoisan. I love Illinois. I'm not going anywhere. We've raised our kids here. I love Illinois. It's a pride and joy. And we got great things here. We got great people. But elections have consequences. And we've seen far too many companies leave Illinois. Just since Pritzker's been in office, Caterpillar left. We had Citadel leave to go to Florida. We had Boeing leave to go to Virginia. We had, just had Morton Salt that just left Illinois. But yet we have Gotion wanting to come in? That should tell you everything about J.B. Pritzker and his billions of dollars. Spent $160 billion to get elected the first time, 160 million and 140 million a second time. It's hard to say no to a billionaire. Go ahead.
Over here.
Hi, my name is Joe Fraser. I'm a resident of Bourbonnais. I come to support Manteno. We spend a lot of our time there. Thank you guys for coming. Bourbonnais has a vested interest in this as well because of a building called Cigna that is in question right now as for who's going to be living in, trying to change the zoning, making it partial residential. It's a big concern of ours. My question isn't about that. That'll be handled. There's a couple people, Amanda as well, Daryl, people who have brought this issue up and made us aware of it, and thank God, because that would have been another backdoor deal that would have been pushed behind and we wouldn't have had a choice in it. My question is the Michigan Gotion and the Illinois Gotion factories tied together? So
Yes.
if one doesn't go, will the other follow? And secondly, as this gentleman said, in November 5th, day one, if the EV mandate is ended, does this also end the problem with these two companies? I don't know if it does. I'm uneducated to it, but maybe you guys can tell me both questions. Are they linked? And if they end that mandate, will this end this problem?
Do you want to speak to the linkage?
Yes, so they have represented that they are linked. That Gotion, the Michigan plant, will be doing one part of it and will be finishing it here in Illinois. I think what we've been seeing is they realize how in jeopardy that Michigan plant is, not only with the local opposition, but with the lawsuit, and they're trying to repivot the Illinois plant here. Amanda's found quite a significant amount of FOIA documents that indicates they're trying to restructure. Now, of course, that wasn't told to the public. That hasn't been, said in any public meeting, but that's what we're seeing. So will it end it if one of the plants ends? I think it'd be very difficult for Gotion to proceed, but they're already taking moves to try to account for that eventuality.
And I can speak to the Michigan and the Washington aspect of this. The entire township board was recalled who had supported the Gotion project. So there's been a big change, a sea change there on the board. The county board of commissioners now may be changed in the November election. And so the local community has gotten very engaged in speaking out against Gotion. In Michigan, we gave, I think, a total of $715 million between the $175 million that the governor's SOAR fund gave, plus the tax abatement of $540 million. So you can see, as Darren pointed out, there's that huge state commitment, and what we're saying is, we shouldn't be doing that, and there will be a big race for the Michigan House of Representatives, and they could have an impact on this as well in November. To your point about the federal mandates, I think what's driving the auto industry to even, what's driving Ford, what's driving our American companies is this EV mandate. Now, they say it's not an EV mandate, but what it is the EPA forcing the hand of our U.S. companies to basically develop cars that can meet these unachievable standards, and the only way you can do it is with EVs. So they're being disingenuous about that when they say there's not an EV mandate. And I believe if we have a new administration that does not go down that line and actually lets Americans choose the vehicles they want to buy, this could change. The No Gotion Act, though, is a key part of this. And the reason that's so important is because Gotion could get, it's not even millions, it's billions of dollars from the IRA, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. And they are exploring how they might be able to do that. If we have a new direction in Washington that does not allow those tax credits to go to our foreign adversaries like China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. Marco Rubio just introduced legislation that would add I think Venezuela and Cuba to that. I mean, I think we'd all agree we shouldn't be funding them either. So I think there's tremendous momentum, and as Darren has pointed out, you're seeing Democrats see the light on this, and more are starting to support this. But we need to keep the momentum going, and we need your help communicating that message. So thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you. We have time for one more question here, and, yeah. Okay.
I don't need your mic, dude, you're fine. I got a loud command voice. My name is Ryan McCaffey. I'm actually running as an independent conservative for District 6 here in Kankakee County, which Gotion is in. So I wanted to get up here and talk a few things. Sworn oath to the Constitution of the United States, just like you gentlemen did, against all enemies, foreign and domestic. There's also an Illinois code that states that all forms of government must be transparent with their people. It's we the people, not we the government, correct? Can you guys hold our supposed elected officials accountable for the crimes they have committed here in office in this town? Can you guys do that?
Well,
we have no oversight, no transparency whatsoever here in this town.
Well, a couple things. I'm a former state and federal prosecutor, so I spent 10 years in a courtroom as a prosecutor, and I prosecuted lots of elected officials. So obviously, you have a local state's attorney in Kankakee County at the state level. You have an attorney general in the state of Illinois. You also have, you're in the Northern District of Illinois, which includes the U.S. Attorney's Office from Chicago, so you have federal prosecutors that have jurisdiction. Obviously, that depends on the facts and evidence in the violation of law and going through that, right? And Robbie knows this quite well, too. So if there is sufficient evidence or crimes that have been committed, obviously those need to be scrutinized and looked at, and there should be an indictment that comes forth if it meets the requirements of the law.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so anyway, I'm happy to follow up with you on what I just articulated and to work with Robbie with you on it too, okay?
Outstanding, thank you very much. Didn't want to take too much time.
All right, well, thank you. All right, well, I promise, this is the last one from Jeannie Ives. Jeannie,
Okay,
thank
and-
you for all you're doing in this effort.
Actually, I want to thank the citizens of Manteno, and you heard today from Robbie Doobie. He is the lawyer. Dave Bergdahl is the local lawyer, and this small community has raised nearly $80,000 for their own legal defense against Gotion. You should go to nogotion-illinois.com and donate to these people, because until we're able to get resolution at the congressional level, the best thing we can do is take them to court and sue their asses off. And that takes money, folks. That takes money. No Gotion-Illinois. They've done Easter egg rolls. Betting squares on the Super Bowl. They've done every little thing that they can do, bake sales, you name it, to raise this money. $80,000, that's a monumental effort, really almost unseen from a community this size, and they deserve your support in the hundreds of dollars a range, thousands of dollars if you can do it. Please support the concerned citizens of Manteno. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll make sure he stays away. I'm going to just turn to Jim real quick here. That concludes our questions. Like I said, we'll be here afterwards to talk to you further about it. Before we close here, I just want to turn it to Chairman Moolenaar if he has any closing comments, and Congressman Baird, and then we'll conclude.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming today. Thank you for speaking out on behalf of your community. I'll tell you, I've seen some amazing heroes who have been really leaders stepping up for their community. Our government works for you. And let's just keep the momentum going. So thanks for being here, and it's wonderful to be with you.
Did you have any comments? I'm good. You're good. Okay.
Just one quick thing. I know it probably wasn't appropriate, but while sitting here, I just sent my staff an email asking them to draft a bill that prohibits elected officials from signing NDAs.
Thank you. Well, let me just close and again acknowledge the people in this room, and from Amanda and David and everybody that has been involved at the